comes a moment in every man's life when the fire dims. The same woman who once unraveled his thoughts now barely stirs a flicker in his soul. Her touch, once magnetic, now feels routine. He finds himself turning away, not because he's angry, not because someone else has taken her place, but because something far more profound, far more terrifying, has occurred. He has seen through the illusion. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of brutal clarity, saw it before anyone else. He warned that what we call passion is not a gift of love, but a trap of nature, a compulsion designed not for happiness, but for reproduction. The ultimate aim of all love affairs, however poetically they may be described, is actually more important than all other ends in human life and is concerned with the composition of the next generation. Schopenhauer, the world as will and representation. In other words, what you mistook for destiny was biology. What you called falling in love was your DNA manipulating your consciousness. And once nature has what it wants, or once it realizes it cannot get what it wants through her, the veil falls, the hunger fades, you no longer burn, and you think something is wrong with you. But nothing is broken. You are not malfunctioning. You are awakening. The podcast you heard only confirms it. Men aren't always the insatiable creatures society portrays them to be. The myth that the masculine impulse is limitless is just that, a myth. In truth, the drive is highly selective. It burns hot in the presence of novelty, mystery, and polarity. But in the presence of routine, in the face of domesticity, it quietly dies. Modern cohabitation smothers the very flame it depends on. We think living together, sharing everything, merging two lives into one, is romantic. But Schopenhauer would laugh. He would tell you, what you're doing is placing a sacred instinct under fluorescent lights. You're dissecting a dream and expecting it to still sing. Desire cannot survive overexposure. This is not opinion. It's observable fact. The podcast draws from the Westermark Effect, a well-documented phenomenon where people raised in close family-like conditions develop a subconscious aversion to one another. Siblings don't desire each other, not because they resist temptation, but because they feel none. Familiarity breeds not intimacy, but repulsion. Now apply that to long-term unions. When a man sees the same woman every day, hears her every complaint, shares her every routine, when the mystery evaporates and the rituals become mechanical, his deeper nature responds. It says, "This is no longer what we seek. What is decided by it is not the weal or woe of the present individual, but the existence and special nature of the human race in future times." Schopenhauer. Do you see the truth here? The drive is not concerned with your pleasure, your loyalty, or your relationship. It serves the species. And once the species is no longer being served, the impulse withdraws, not out of spite, but out of design. And now you're left in silence, questioning yourself. But Schopenhauer offers something no modern therapist, no self-help book, no pop psychologist can, an escape from the shame. He offers you philosophical dignity. He tells you plainly, the fading of your appetite is not a malfunction. It's a message. The system has completed its task. You are free now, if you dare to be. That's what no one tells men. That freedom often feels like emptiness. That peace can feel like apathy. That liberation from the drive might look, from the outside, like withdrawal, but is in truth a higher state of awareness. The sexual impulse is the most vehement of all cravings, the desire which seizes the mind and overpowers the will like a madness. Schopenhauer. And what happens when madness lifts? You don't collapse. You don't fail. You simply begin to see. When the fog lifts and the madness subsides, a strange clarity takes its place. The same clarity a man feels after escaping a dangerous enchantment. He no longer views her through the golden haze of longing. He sees her as she is, human, familiar, finite. And though he may still care for her, even respect her, the fire that once devoured his thoughts now barely smolders. This isn't indifference, it's sobriety. The lover imagines he is pursuing his own interest, while in truth he is serving an interest foreign to himself, the species. Schopenhauer. This is the betrayal most men never detect, that their deepest cravings, their poetic confessions, their sleepless obsessions were never entirely theirs. They were pawns in a game as old as time, participants in a biological ritual whose aim was not fulfillment, but continuity. And when that aim is removed, the ritual becomes stale. Modern relationships, by their very structure, unknowingly accelerate this disillusionment. The closer two people draw into daily routine, the more predictability replaces polarity. Shared bathrooms, shared schedules, the endless loop of small talk and errands. These aren't just practicalities. They are eros killers. They dissolve tension, blur boundaries, and ultimately dismantle the architecture of attraction. The podcast's reference to the Westermark Effect is no throwaway observation. It's a clue, perhaps the most important clue of all. Children raised in sibling-like closeness rarely feel drawn to one another in adulthood. The aversion is subconscious, but profound, and it stems not from morality, but from biology's deep programming to avoid stagnation and inbreeding. Now consider the parallels. Long-term couples often replicate this same closeness, cohabiting like siblings, experiencing every high and low together, witnessing each other in states of vulnerability that kill allure. Over time, the bond becomes familial, not romantic. She becomes emotionally closer, but physically less compelling. And men feel this shift acutely. Yet society has no vocabulary for it. It calls him lazy, broken. It shames him for no longer craving what once thrilled him. But Schopenhauer? He understood. The will to life does not care for the individual. It drives him blindly toward propagation, and once satisfied, leaves him empty. Schopenhauer, paraphrased, that emptiness is not failure. It is the echo of a completed mission. Men must understand this. Nature is not your friend. It is not interested in your happiness or your marriage. It cares only that you chase long enough to reproduce. The chase is the spell. The consummation is the collapse. Afterward, the mask drops, and what once looked divine now looks disturbingly normal. In this sense, men don't lose interest in desire. They lose interest in illusion. What fades is not manhood, but delusion. What dies is not your virility, but the fantasy that intimacy and reality can coexist indefinitely. They can't. Not under the same roof, not under fluorescent lights, not when routine replaces mystery. And this is why traditional societies were structured so differently. The podcast touched on this too. In tribal or ancient communities, men spent most of their time with other men, working, hunting, building. Women raised children together, maintaining their own sphere. Intimacy between the sexes was preserved precisely because it was rare. Scarcity created tension. Tension created passion. We've lost that. Today we pursue closeness at all costs, believing that more access will create more desire. But the opposite is true. Access breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds indifference. And indifference breeds confusion, especially for men who believed they would always want her. But you were never supposed to always want her. You were supposed to awaken. You see, Schopenhauer was not merely describing desire. He was diagnosing the human condition. And in his diagnosis, the fading of physical craving is not a disease. It is the beginning of sanity. The truth is this. What most men call love, Schopenhauer called captivity, a biological snare masquerading as divine connection. And when the spell lifts, when the eyes clear and the heart quiets, the man is left staring at a reality he never anticipated. He is no longer captivated. But the world does not prepare men for this. There are no ceremonies for the quiet departure of craving, no language for the subtle mourning that comes when longing no longer stirs. So men suffer in silence. They question themselves. They wonder if age has dulled them, if something is missing in their hormones, their masculinity, their identity. But the only thing missing is the lie. The post-coital feeling of disgust is the true voice of nature. Schopenhauer. This line, often mocked, is not a punchline. It is a revelation. That moment of emptiness after gratification, the one you never speak about, the one that feels like a kind of spiritual nausea, that is nature retreating. The will to life has completed its mission. The puppet strings go limp, and in that stillness, you realize you were never fully in control. This is not romantic. This is reality. And reality for the awakened man is rarely comforting. The podcast framed this transformation through familiarity. When two people spend excessive time together under familial conditions, desire fades. Not because love is gone, but because mystery is. And men, more than they admit, are aroused by distance, by contrast, by something slightly unreachable. Once she becomes completely known, the primal dance ends. You're not being ungrateful, you're responding, honestly, to a loss of polarity. In traditional societies, this polarity was preserved by structure. Roles were distinct. Time together was limited. The sacredness of the union was protected by space. Today, we celebrate emotional closeness at the cost of attraction. We remove all barriers, believing that love thrives in total transparency. But Schopenhauer knew better. Marriage is the trap that nature uses to deceive the individual into acting for the benefit of the species. Schopenhauer. And once the trap is sprung, once the papers are signed, the routines established, the masks dropped, desire walks out the back door. Some men try to recapture it with novelty, affairs, fantasies, addictions. But none of it works, not for long. Because the core misunderstanding remains, that your fading interest is a defect to be corrected rather than a signal to be understood. You see, the masculine drive is not infinite. It is targeted. It ignites in the presence of possibility, of risk, of reward just beyond reach. Once all that is secured, owned, normalized, what's left to chase? The energy doesn't vanish. It simply seeks another outlet. And this is where Schopenhauer offers a path forward. He did not believe in numbing the senses or retreating into hedonism. He believed in transcendence, of turning away from the false promises of worldly satisfaction and redirecting energy toward clarity, discipline, and insight. In his view, the man who outgrows his desires is not cursed. He is chosen. The more clearly we think, the more we shall see that the real aim of life is not enjoyment, but the negation of the will. Schopenhauer. Negation of the will. The quiet rebellion against the endless chase. The man who no longer thirsts for every new touch, every new thrill, is not dying. He is maturing. He is reclaiming what nature borrowed, his agency. And yet this path is lonely, because few speak of it, because the world still insists that masculinity is measured by hunger, by performance, by conquest. But what if true masculinity is measured not by how much a man wants, but by what he can walk away from? What if losing interest is not collapse, but evolution? There is a silent revolution taking place in the hearts of men, a transformation so subtle, so unspoken, that even the men experiencing it don't always recognize what's happening. They feel less compelled, less moved, less entangled by the same fantasies that once stirred them like a storm. At first they panic, then they grieve, and finally, if they are wise, they begin to understand. They are not becoming less of a man. They are becoming more of themselves. Schopenhauer did not write to flatter. He wrote to free. And in his clearest moments, he revealed that true liberation comes not through indulgence, but through renunciation, not through clinging to the flame, but through outgrowing the need to be burned. The truth is, every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Schopenhauer. But when the field expands, when the veil of craving lifts, when a man sees past the illusions that once governed his behavior, his world opens. He realizes that what he once called intimacy was often dependency, that what he once called love was often addiction, that what he once called chemistry was often a glitch in the biological software designed to keep him tethered to his species' demands. And suddenly, in the stillness of lost desire, he finds room to think, to create, to observe, to step back from the game and see it not as sacred, but as staged, not as a divine union, but as a clever trick of evolution dressed in poetry and perfume. Now let's return briefly to what the podcast described, that physical longing erodes in the face of prolonged familiarity, that overexposure breeds psychic saturation, that intimacy, when unmanaged, becomes emotional claustrophobia. This was never about losing attraction overnight. It was about what happens when a woman becomes too known, when all her mysteries have been decoded, when every corner of her being has been mapped, explained, normalized. The novelty dies, the polarity dissolves, and the man is left with companionship, but no longer combustion. With the fading of illusion, Our interest in the object fades also. Schopenhauer, paraphrased from the world as will and representation men, are visual creatures, yes, but more importantly, they are psychological creatures. And when the mind can no longer project onto the partner an image of otherness, of sacred unfamiliarity, the body soon follows. This is why even the most physically beautiful woman will eventually be met with indifference if the psychic polarity is lost. Because the body is not pursuing beauty alone, it's pursuing significance, difference, the echo of tension that once meant potential. And what modern relationships do, what marriage, especially in its current form, guarantees, is the rapid erosion of that tension. By pushing for emotional transparency, total availability, and shared everything, it erodes the very mystery that once fed the masculine spark. It creates the conditions for what feels, over time, like siblinghood. And nothing suffocates longing more than the comfort of sameness. Now here's the cruel irony. When men begin to lose interest, they are often blamed, accused of immaturity, coldness, or emotional avoidance. But what they're really doing is responding to a deeper truth, the same truth Schopenhauer laid bare. They are experiencing the withdrawal of the will. The will, that silent force inside every man, is like a demanding God. It commands with urgency, deceives with beauty, and rewards only briefly before receding into shadow. And when it departs, the man is left holding the shell of his former obsession, still warm, still familiar, but empty. And if he clings to it out of guilt or fear, he begins to rot from within. But if he lets go, if he dares to walk away, he steps into the one realm no one teaches men to enter: peace. Peace is not as glamorous as passion. It does not make your heart race or your palms sweat. It does not flood you with fantasies or fantasies of conquest. It is not the stuff of sonnets or love songs. But peace, as Schopenhauer understood it, is the only antidote to illusion. And it is what awaits a man who no longer mistakes his cravings for truth. To the world, you may look like you've lost something. You're not chasing, you're not performing, you're not trying to prove your desirability through numbers or novelty. But in truth, you've simply stopped dancing for a force that never had your best interest in mind. You've seen through the seduction. A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Schopenhauer. That's it, isn't it? You cannot force yourself to want what has already been consumed. You cannot reignite a flame that was never truly yours. It belonged to nature, to the species, to the will. Once its work is done, it leaves. And what remains is not emptiness, but clarity. Now clarity is often misdiagnosed as depression. A man who no longer feels the compulsion to pursue is labeled numb, broken, defective. But what if he is not depressed? What if he is finally free from the addiction? What if the silence he feels is not the absence of meaning, but the beginning of it? Schopenhauer pointed toward asceticism not out of hatred for life, but out of profound understanding. He saw the endless chase, the hunger, the jealousy, the heartbreak, the madness, and said, enough. He showed us that it is not through conquest that we find peace, but through release, through stepping back from the fire and seeing it for what it is, a spectacle designed to enslave your spirit. Men, hear this clearly. Your fading desire does not mean you failed, it means you're awakening. You've crossed the threshold where the mirage no longer works on you. You've lived enough, seen enough, felt enough to recognize the pattern, and now you face a choice. Try to reignite a fire that only burned to deceive you, or walk into the stillness and claim your mind as your own. This is the real initiation. Not your first kiss, not your first conquest, not your wedding day, but the moment you look at the thing you once worshipped and realize it no longer moves you. Not because you are cold, but because you have evolved. You no longer need the illusion. You've outgrown the game. And if you've made it this far, if these words resonate, if the silence inside you now feels less like emptiness and more like power, then it's time to speak to other men who are silently suffering in confusion, blaming themselves for a perfectly natural evolution. Share this with them. Wake them up. Give them the gift of truth that no one else dares to speak. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more hard truths they're too afraid to tell you. And support the channel through the link in the description, because if we don't speak up, the lie will remain unchallenged. You're not broken, you're becoming free. And that is the beginning of everything.